Elena Voss had seen many wonders during her journey across the galaxy, but nothing had prepared her for the crystalline magnificence of the draconic Imperial Palace on Celestine. The structure rose from the planet's surface like a frozen symphony of light and geometry, its faceted walls refracting the binary suns into prismatic rainbows that danced across the courtyard where shuttles deposited visitors from across the Astral Coalition. "Remember, humans are here as part of the diplomatic exchange program," instructed Supervisor Walsh, a stern woman whose enthusiasm for interspecies relations had been thoroughly crushed by 3 decades of bureaucratic service. "You represent Earth's commitment to peaceful cooperation. Try not to embarrass our entire species." Elena nodded dutifully while privately wondering if anyone had bothered to explain the diplomatic exchange concept to the dragons. The massive reptilian beings who moved through the palace corridors with predatory grace seemed to regard humans with the same interest most people showed toward particularly intelligent houseplants. The orientation briefing had been conducted in what was euphemistically called the service wing, a collection of utilitarian chambers that contrasted sharply with the opulent grandeur visible through reinforced windows. Elena's assigned quarters resembled a college dormitory room designed by someone who believed comfort was a character flaw. "Your primary responsibility is maintenance of the Imperial residential section," Supervisor Walsh continued, consulting her tablet with the grim efficiency of someone reading execution orders. "The Emperor's private chambers require daily attention, and dragons are very particular about cleanliness standards." Elena accepted her uniform and cleaning supplies, noting that the fabric felt sturdy enough to survive industrial accidents but possessed all the aesthetic appeal of recycled cardboard. The cleaning equipment, at least, appeared sophisticated, molecular scrubbers and atmospheric purifiers that could probably sterilize small moons if necessary. "One final point," Walsh added with the tone of someone delivering crucial survival information. "Direct interaction with dragon nobility is strictly forbidden unless they specifically address you first." Lord Dracath was very clear about maintaining proper hierarchical boundaries. The service corridors that connected the human quarters to the rest of the palace were clearly an afterthought in the original architectural design. Elena navigated the narrow passages with her cleaning cart, occasionally glimpsing the main corridors through strategic viewing panels. The contrast was striking. While humans scurried through cramped service tunnels, dragons moved through soaring galleries filled with floating crystal formations and holographic art displays. Emperor Kairos himself was a legendary figure throughout the coalition, renowned for expanding the empire through diplomatic integration rather than military conquest. Elena had studied his achievements during the journey to Celestine, learning about the complex political structures that govern dozens of species across hundreds of worlds. Meeting him had never been part of her job expectations. The Imperial residential section was a marvel of architectural engineering that seemed to defy several laws of physics. Gravity fields shifted smoothly between surfaces, allowing movement across walls and ceilings as easily as floors. Atmospheric processors maintained perfect environmental conditions while holographic windows displayed views of distant worlds within the Empire. Elena began her work with the methodical precision that had earned her selection for the exchange program. The molecular scrubbers responded to her touch with gentle efficiency, removing dust particles and atmospheric contaminants that normal human senses couldn't even detect. The technology was intuitive enough that species barriers seemed irrelevant. Good design apparently transcended biology. The Emperor's private study contained artifacts from dozens of worlds, each piece carefully positioned to create harmonious aesthetic arrangements. Elena worked around them with extreme caution, aware that some items were probably worth more than Earth's annual gross domestic product. A crystalline sculpture from the vegan system hummed with internal energy patterns that resembled frozen music. The bioelectric resonance fields in these chambers require daily recalibration, Elena muttered to herself, consulting the maintenance manual. Because apparently even the air in this place is more sophisticated than anything we have on Earth. She activated the atmospheric processor, watching as nearly invisible energy patterns shifted throughout the room. The device responded perfectly to her commands, though she noticed that certain advanced functions remained locked behind biometric security that required draconic neural patterns. Humans could maintain the technology but couldn't access its full capabilities. The sound of approaching footsteps in the main corridor caused Elena to freeze momentarily. Dragon footfalls were distinctive, heavier than human steps but with a fluid rhythm that suggested predatory grace. She focused intently on her cleaning tasks, hoping to remain unnoticed as whoever was approaching passed by the study entrance. Through the transparent aluminum doorway, Elena glimpsed a group of dragon nobles engaged in what appeared to be serious political discussion. Their scaled forms moved with the unconscious authority of beings accustomed to command, voices carrying harmonics that human ears could barely perceive. She recognized Lord Dracath from the orientation materials, an imposing figure whose presence seemed to demand submission from everyone in his vicinity. The human servants have been adequately integrated into palace operations, Lord Dracath was saying, his voice carrying the particular tone that politicians used when discussing mildly distasteful but necessary administrative details. They perform their functions without interfering with normal court activities. Lady Serpentina, whose elegant form was adorned with jeweled scales that probably cost more than small planets, nodded agreement. As long as they remember their place in the imperial hierarchy. Some species require frequent reminders of their proper station. Elena continued her work with increased focus, hoping to complete her tasks before the group decided to inspect the study she was cleaning. The conversation continued in the corridor, touching on subjects that were clearly far above her security clearance level. She caught references to trade negotiations, military deployments, and diplomatic protocols that governed coalition politics. The cleaning equipment required careful handling around the more delicate artifacts, particularly a collection of quantum crystals that stored information in multidimensional matrices. Elena worked with the precision of a surgeon, aware that damaging any of these items would probably result in immediate deportation and possible criminal charges. The exchange program serves its diplomatic purposes, came another voice from the corridor, but we must ensure that human presence doesn't compromise palace security or imperial dignity. Elena finished her tasks and began organizing her equipment for departure, grateful that the noble discussion seemed to be moving toward conclusion. The service corridor entrance was positioned to allow discreet withdrawal without crossing the main hallway where the dragons were conversing. As she maneuvered her cleaning cart toward the exit, Elena took one last look around the study to ensure everything was properly arranged. The crystalline artifacts caught the light in patterns that seemed almost alive, creating an atmosphere of beauty and sophistication that made her feel simultaneously privileged and insignificant. The service corridors felt smaller and more cramped after experiencing the grandeur of the imperial chambers, but Elena was grateful for the sanctuary they provided. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and opportunities to prove that humans could contribute meaningfully to the palace operations, even if their contributions were limited to maintaining the environments where more important beings conducted the real business of governing an interstellar empire. The trouble began 3 weeks into Elena's assignment, when Lady Serpentina decided that human incompetence needed correction. Elena had been maintaining the Crystal Garden's atmospheric processors when the dragon noblewoman arrived for her daily meditation, her jeweled scales catching the artificial sunlight in patterns that were both beautiful and somehow menacing. The harmonic resonance in this chamber is disrupted, Lady Serpentina announced, her voice carrying the authority of someone accustomed to having her observations treated as absolute truth. Clearly the human cleaning methods are inadequate for maintaining proper energy balance. Elena paused in her work, checking her equipment readings twice before responding. The atmospheric processors are functioning within normal parameters, she said carefully. All resonance frequencies are stable according to the monitoring systems. Lady Serpentina's eyes narrowed with the particular displeasure that powerful beings showed when their pronouncements were questioned by lesser creatures. Are you suggesting that my senses are incorrect? That a human servant understands draconic environmental requirements better than someone of my bloodline? The question was clearly rhetorical, designed to establish dominance rather than gather information. Elena recognized the trap but couldn't see a way to avoid it without compromising her professional integrity. I'm simply reporting the technical readings, my lady. If you're experiencing disruption, perhaps there's an issue I haven't detected. The issue, Lady Serpentina said with Arctic precision, is human incompetence masquerading as technical expertise. She gestured toward one of the crystal formations, a delicate spire that hummed with internal energy patterns. This artifact has been contaminated by inappropriate handling. The quantum matrix shows clear signs of degradation from exposure to primitive bioelectric fields. Elena examined the crystal carefully, noting that its energy output remained consistent with baseline readings. The quantum matrix appeared stable, showing no signs of the degradation Lady Serpentina described. However, contradicting a dragon noble's assessment was clearly not an option that would end well. "I apologize if my maintenance procedures have caused any problems," Elena said, hoping diplomatic humility might defuse the situation. "Perhaps you could suggest improvements to my cleaning protocols." "The improvement," Lady Serpentina replied, "would be assigning this sector to someone capable of recognizing their own limitations." The conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Lord Dracath, whose presence immediately shifted the power dynamics in the chamber. Lady Serpentina's aggressive posture became deferential, while Elena found herself wishing the service corridors had emergency exits. "Lady Serpentina," Lord Dracath said with the smooth courtesy that barely concealed predatory interest. "I trust the human is providing adequate service." "Barely adequate," Lady Serpentina replied, her tone suggesting that even this assessment was generous. "The creature seems to believe its primitive understanding of technology qualifies it to question draconic sensory perception." Elena felt her stomach perform gymnastics as she realized the conversation had moved from professional critique to character assassination. Lord Dracath's expression suggested someone evaluating whether a problem required immediate correction or could be addressed through administrative channels. "Human technical training is necessarily limited," Lord Dracath observed, studying Elena with the interest a scientist might show toward an unusual specimen. "Perhaps a more thorough education in proper protocols would be beneficial." The word education carried implications that made Elena extremely nervous. She had heard rumors about dragon disciplinary methods from other human workers, stories that were carefully shared in whispers during meal breaks. None of those stories had ended well for the humans involved. "I'm willing to undergo additional training," Elena offered, hoping to demonstrate cooperativeness before the situation escalated further. "If my current methods are inadequate, I want to learn better approaches." "Training is one option," Lord Dracath agreed, his tone suggesting that other options were being considered simultaneously. "However, some lessons are best taught through direct experience rather than theoretical instruction." Lady Serpentina's smile held no warmth whatsoever. "Perhaps a demonstration of the consequences of inadequate performance would be more effective than additional training sessions." Elena realized that the conversation had moved beyond professional development into territory that threatened her continued employment and possibly her physical safety. The two dragons were clearly coordinating their approach, using the supposed technical inadequacy as justification for what was beginning to sound like punishment. "Guard Captain Thorne," Lord Dracath called, and a heavily armored dragon materialized from the corridor with the fluid motion of someone who had been waiting just outside. "Please escort this human to the disciplinary chamber. Lady Serpentina will provide instructions regarding appropriate corrective measures." "That's not necessary," Elena said quickly, fighting to keep panic from her voice. "I can adjust my procedures immediately. There's no need for formal discipline over a technical disagreement." "This isn't about technical procedures," Lady Serpentina corrected with obvious satisfaction. "This is about teaching proper respect for authority and recognition of hierarchical boundaries. Humans must learn their place within Imperial structure." Guard Captain Thorne approached with the methodical efficiency of someone following standard protocols. His armored form was imposing enough to make Elena feel like a child facing an adult authority figure, though the comparison was probably more accurate than she wanted to admit. "Please come with me," Captain Thorne said, his voice carrying the professional courtesy that made compliance seem like a reasonable choice rather than forced submission. "The disciplinary process will be brief and educational." Elena accompanied the guard through corridors she had never seen before, passing chambers that seemed designed for functions she preferred not to contemplate. The architecture in this section was more utilitarian than aesthetic, suggesting that beauty was less important than functionality for whatever activities occurred here. The disciplinary chamber was exactly what Elena had feared, a sterile room equipped with restraint systems and monitoring equipment that suggested scientific precision in the application of corrective measures. She wondered if the diplomatic exchange program administrators on Earth were aware of these facilities. Standard protocol for insubordination and technical incompetence, Captain Thorne explained, consulting a tablet that apparently contained detailed procedures for human discipline. 12 applications with the neural disruptor, followed by remedial training materials. The neural disruptor resembled a crystalline rod that hummed with energy patterns designed to cause pain without permanent damage. Elena realized that the dragons had developed scientifically precise methods for punishment that would leave no lasting evidence of mistreatment. "This is about teaching respect," Lady Serpentina said, entering the chamber with Lord Dracath close behind. "Humans must understand that questioning draconic authority has consequences. Consider this an important lesson in diplomatic relations." The first application of the neural disruptor felt like being struck by lightning while simultaneously experiencing the worst headache imaginable. Elena managed to avoid crying out, though maintaining dignity under such circumstances required considerable effort. "Excellent stoicism," Lord Dracath observed clinically. "Human pain tolerance is higher than expected. Increase the intensity for the remaining applications." By the time the session concluded, Elena understood exactly why other human workers had seemed nervous when discussing their interactions with dragon nobility. The experience was designed to be memorable without being permanently damaging, a carefully calibrated reminder of power relationships within the Imperial hierarchy. "I trust this educational experience has been beneficial," Lady Serpentina said as Elena was released from the restraint system. "Future interactions should reflect improved understanding of appropriate behavioral boundaries." Elena nodded agreement while carefully hiding the fury that threatened to overwhelm her diplomatic training. She had learned an important lesson, though probably not the one her tormentors intended. The Crystal Garden's atmospheric processors had been functioning perfectly, and everyone in that chamber knew it. The bruises from the neural disruptor were carefully hidden beneath Elena's uniform sleeves, but the memory of that crystalline rod remained vivid enough to make her hands shake slightly during her morning cleaning routine. She had discovered that dragon disciplinary methods were precisely calibrated to cause maximum discomfort while leaving minimal visible evidence, a scientific approach to punishment that was both impressive and terrifying. "Keep your head down and your mouth shut," advised Marcus Webb, a human maintenance worker who had been at the palace for 8 months. "The dragons don't see us as people. We're animate tools, and tools that malfunction get replaced." Elena nodded while organizing her cleaning supplies, though she suspected that Marcus's survival strategy involved compromises she wasn't prepared to make. The other human workers moved through the service corridors with the careful efficiency of people who had learned that visibility often led to unwanted attention. "Lady Serpentina has been asking questions about your performance," Marcus continued quietly. "Apparently she's not satisfied with the educational session you received yesterday. Some dragons enjoy the teaching process more than others." The Imperial residential section felt different now that Elena understood the potential consequences of any perceived inadequacy. Every surface she cleaned, every system she maintained, carried the weight of possible punishment if her work was judged insufficient by beings who measured competence by entirely alien standards. Emperor Kairos materialized in his private study with the fluid grace that characterized high-level dragon teleportation. Elena, who had been carefully dusting a collection of quantum memory crystals, nearly dropped her equipment in surprise. Protocol demanded that she immediately withdraw from any chamber the Emperor entered, but his presence had been so sudden that retreat seemed impossible without drawing attention. "Please continue your work," the Emperor said, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested both authority and unexpected gentleness. "I prefer observing palace operations without causing disruption to daily routines." Elena resumed her cleaning with heightened awareness of every movement, knowing that any mistake in the Emperor's presence would probably have consequences far beyond additional disciplinary sessions. She had studied recordings of Emperor Kairos during her journey to Celestine, but experiencing his presence directly was overwhelming in ways she hadn't anticipated. The Emperor was massive even by dragon standards, his scaled form radiating an aura of controlled power that made the air itself seem to vibrate with potential energy. Yet his movements were precise and deliberate, suggesting intelligence that operated on levels human cognition couldn't fully comprehend. "You are Elena Voss," the Emperor said, though the statement was clearly based on information rather than inquiry. "Part of the diplomatic exchange program from Earth. How are you finding palace life?" The question was simultaneously simple and loaded with implications. Elena realized that her response could affect not only her own situation but potentially the entire exchange program. Honesty might lead to diplomatic complications, but dishonesty with someone of the Emperor's capabilities seemed equally dangerous. "The palace is magnificent, Your Imperial Majesty," Elena replied carefully. "The technology and architecture represent achievements far beyond anything on Earth. I'm honored to contribute to maintaining such remarkable facilities." Emperor Cairo studied her with eyes that seemed to perceive far more than visual information. Elena had the uncomfortable sensation of being thoroughly evaluated by an intelligence that could probably read her emotional state through bioelectric field analysis. Diplomatic answers, the Emperor observed with what might have been amusement. Properly constructed responses that convey respect while avoiding controversial subjects. "Your training has been thorough." Elena continued her work while wondering if the Emperor was testing her honesty or simply making conversation. The quantum memory crystals required delicate handling, each one containing information compressed into molecular matrices that could probably store humanity's entire literary output. "The exchange program represents an interesting experiment in interspecies cooperation," the Emperor continued, moving through the study with the fluid motion of someone completely comfortable in their environment. "Cultural integration presents challenges that purely diplomatic relationships cannot address." "Yes, Your Majesty," Elena agreed, though she wondered if the Emperor was aware of the specific challenges human workers faced from certain members of his court. Direct cultural contact provides insights that theoretical study cannot achieve. "Indeed," the Emperor said, and Elena detected subtle harmonics in his voice that suggested deeper consideration of her words. "Though I suspect the practical realities of integration differ considerably from the theoretical frameworks outlined in diplomatic agreements." The observation was perceptive enough to make Elena wonder exactly how much the Emperor knew about conditions in the service sections. She had assumed that beings of his stature remained insulated from day-to-day operational details, but perhaps Imperial awareness was more comprehensive than most people realized. "Integration always involves adjustment periods," Elena replied diplomatically. "Different species have different approaches to hierarchy and social organization. Learning to work within established systems requires patience and flexibility." "Patience and flexibility," the Emperor repeated, his tone suggesting that these concepts carried particular significance. "Admirable qualities that benefit both individuals and civilizations. Though I wonder if the adjustment process places equal demands on all participants." Elena realized that the conversation was moving into territory where complete honesty might be both dangerous and necessary. The Emperor's question suggested awareness that the integration process wasn't proceeding as smoothly as official reports might indicate. "Adjustment is rarely symmetrical," she said carefully. "Those with less power typically bear greater responsibility for accommodation." Emperor Kairos paused in his movement through the study, his attention focusing entirely on Elena with an intensity that made her feel simultaneously visible and vulnerable. She had the impression that her last response had revealed more than she intended. "An interesting perspective," the Emperor said quietly. "One that suggests experience with asymmetrical power relationships." Elena finished cleaning the quantum memory crystals and moved to the atmospheric processing unit, hoping that focus on technical tasks might provide emotional stability during what was becoming an increasingly complex conversation. "Power relationships exist in all social structures," she replied. "Understanding them is necessary for effective cooperation within any organization." "Understanding," the Emperor agreed. "But understanding and accepting are different concepts. Some power relationships serve beneficial purposes, while others exist primarily to maintain dominance through intimidation. The words carried implications that made Elena wonder if the Emperor was specifically aware of her recent disciplinary session. His questions seemed designed to encourage honesty about subjects that could have serious political consequences. True leadership protects those who cannot protect themselves, Elena said, then immediately wondered if such a direct statement constituted dangerous political commentary. Emperor Cairo smiled, an expression that was both magnificent and slightly terrifying on features designed for predatory efficiency. A principle that applies regardless of species or technological development. Leadership that requires the suffering of the vulnerable is not leadership but organized exploitation. Elena realized that the Emperor had just made a statement that contradicted the power structures currently operating within his own palace. Either he was testing her political loyalty, or he was expressing genuine principles that certain members of his court were violating. "Your work here demonstrates commendable dedication," the Emperor said, apparently concluding their conversation. The exchange program benefits from participants who understand that true cooperation requires mutual respect rather than enforced submission. As the Emperor departed, Elena found herself wondering if their encounter had been as random as it appeared. His questions and observations suggested awareness of conditions that official channels might not have reported, raising the possibility that her situation was being monitored at the highest levels of Imperial authority. Elena's second encounter with Lady Serpentina's idea of education came 2 days after her conversation with the Emperor, triggered by what the dragon noblewoman described as insufficient attention to detail in quantum crystal maintenance. The accusation was fabricated, but Elena had learned that truth was often irrelevant when powerful beings decided that lessons needed to be taught. The resonance frequency degradation is clearly visible to anyone with proper sensory development, Lady Serpentina announced, examining a crystal formation that showed no signs of deterioration according to every monitoring system in the chamber. Human limitations should not excuse negligent performance. Lord Dracath had arrived as if summoned, his timing suggesting that these educational sessions were coordinated rather than spontaneous. Elena realized that she had become a convenient target for demonstrating dragon authority, though she couldn't understand why her specific situation warranted such focused attention. Repeated infractions require escalated corrective measures, Lord Dracath observed, consulting his ever-present tablet. Standard protocols suggest increased intensity and duration for persistence patterns. The second disciplinary session was considerably more thorough than the first. The neural disruptor applications were supplemented with restraint systems that prevented movement while crystalline resonators created sympathetic pain patterns throughout her nervous system. Elena discovered that dragon technology could inflict suffering with scientific precision. Behavioral modification requires consistent reinforcement, Captain Thorne explained clinically as he adjusted the equipment settings. Human neural patterns respond well to calibrated stimulus applications when properly administered. Elena endured the session by focusing on technical aspects of the torture equipment, using her engineering background to analyze the energy patterns and delivery systems. The distraction helped maintain mental equilibrium while her body was being systematically educated about respect for authority. Excellent pain tolerance progression, Lady Serpentina noted with academic interest. Humans adapt to discomfort levels more efficiently than initial projections suggested. Perhaps intensity parameters should be recalibrated for optimal educational impact. The bruises from the second session were more extensive, spreading across her ribs and upper arms in patterns that perfectly matched the restraint system configurations. Elena spent considerable effort arranging her uniform to conceal the evidence, though she suspected that other human workers recognized the signs. "They're targeting you specifically," Marcus warned during one of their brief corridor encounters. "Lady Serpentina has been making inquiries about your background and training. Whatever you did to attract attention, she's not planning to let it go." Elena continued her maintenance duties with mechanical precision, focusing on technical requirements while trying to ignore the constant awareness that any perceived inadequacy could trigger additional educational opportunities. The palace's crystalline corridors felt like a beautiful prison where the walls themselves might report suspicious behavior. The third fabricated infraction occurred during atmospheric processor maintenance in the Emperor's private chambers. Elena was calibrating quantum field harmonics when Emperor Kairos arrived unexpectedly, his presence immediately shifting the energy patterns throughout the chamber. "Your Majesty," Elena said, moving to withdraw from the chamber according to established protocols. "Please continue your work," the Emperor replied, but his attention focused on Elena with an intensity that hadn't been present during their previous encounter. "I'm interested in observing maintenance procedures for the atmospheric systems." Elena resumed her calibration work, though the Emperor's scrutiny made every movement feel significant. She had learned to maintain professional competence despite physical discomfort, but the presence of Imperial authority added psychological pressure that was difficult to ignore. "The quantum field stabilizers require daily adjustment," Elena explained, hoping that technical discussion might provide safe conversational territory. "Harmonic drift occurs naturally due to crystalline matrix fluctuations. You move carefully," the Emperor observed, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested analytical assessment. "As if physical motion causes discomfort." Elena realized that the Emperor's sensory capabilities probably included bioelectric field analysis that could detect pain responses and stress patterns. Her attempts to conceal the effects of recent disciplinary sessions were likely failing against someone with draconic perceptual abilities. "Precision work requires careful movement," Elena replied, though she could hear the tension in her own voice. "The equipment responds to exact positioning and controlled manipulation." Emperor Kairos moved closer, his massive form radiating authority that made the chamber feel smaller despite its considerable dimensions. Elena continued her work while trying to ignore the sensation of being thoroughly evaluated by someone whose judgment could determine her continued existence. "Show me your arms," the Emperor said quietly. The request was simple, direct, and absolutely terrifying. Elena realized that concealment was no longer possible against someone with the Emperor's capabilities and authority. Her choices had narrowed to compliance or defiance, either of which could have catastrophic consequences. "Your Majesty?" Elena asked, hoping for clarification while knowing that the request was perfectly clear. "Your arms," the Emperor repeated, his voice carrying harmonics that suggested both patience and absolute determination. "Remove your sleeves and show me your arms." Elena slowly rolled up her sleeves, revealing the bruise patterns that marked her encounters with dragon educational methods. The neural disruptor burns were particularly visible, creating geometric patterns across her skin that perfectly matched the equipment configurations used in the disciplinary chambers. Emperor Kairos studied the evidence with an expression that was difficult to interpret on features designed for predatory efficiency. Elena could feel energy patterns shifting throughout the chamber as the Emperor's emotional state changed, causing the crystalline walls to resonate with frequencies that human ears could barely perceive. "How did you receive these injuries?" the Emperor asked, though his tone suggested that he already understood their source. Elena realized that her answer could affect not only her own situation but potentially the entire diplomatic exchange program. Honesty might trigger political consequences that extended far beyond personal considerations, but deception seemed impossible against someone with the Emperor's capabilities. "Disciplinary education sessions," Elena replied quietly. "For performance inadequacies in crystal maintenance and atmospheric system calibration." "Performance inadequacies," the Emperor repeated, his voice carrying harmonics that made the chamber's crystal formations vibrate sympathetically. "What specific inadequacies justified this level of corrective intervention?" Elena explained the fabricated infractions, the technical impossibilities of the alleged equipment failures, and the systematic nature of the educational sessions. The Emperor listened without interruption, his attention focused entirely on her account while energy patterns continued building throughout the chamber. "Who authorized these disciplinary measures?" the Emperor asked when Elena finished her explanation. "Lord Dracath and Lady Serpentina," Elena replied, then added quietly, "They said it was about teaching proper respect for authority and hierarchical boundaries." The Emperor's expression shifted in ways that Elena couldn't interpret, but the energy patterns in the chamber indicated emotional states that were probably not compatible with continued diplomatic relations. The crystalline walls began emitting harmonic frequencies that suggested barely controlled fury. "They said this was about respect," the Emperor said, his voice carrying harmonics that made Elena's bones vibrate. And what has this education taught you about imperial authority? Elena realized that her answer would probably determine whether the diplomatic exchange program continued or ended in catastrophic failure. The Emperor was clearly furious, but whether that fury was directed at her situation or her reporting of it remained unclear. It taught me that power without justice is just organized cruelty, Elena said honestly. And that true authority doesn't require the suffering of those who cannot defend themselves. Emperor Kairos stood motionless for nearly a full minute after Elena's response, his massive form radiating energy patterns that caused every crystalline surface in the chamber to sing with harmonic frequencies that approached the threshold of human pain tolerance. Elena had never experienced draconic fury at close range and discovered that it was both magnificent and absolutely terrifying. Justice, the Emperor said finally, his voice carrying harmonics that seemed to originate from the chamber walls themselves. An interesting concept to hear from someone who has experienced its absence. Elena remained silent, recognizing that the Emperor was processing information and emotions that operated on scales beyond human comprehension. The energy patterns in the chamber continued building, suggesting that imperial fury was a force that could probably be detected from orbit. Summon Intelligence Coordinator Vex, the Emperor commanded, apparently addressing the palace's central consciousness system. Priority Alpha Authorization. Immediate response required. Elena had never heard of Intelligence Coordinator Vex, but the title suggested capabilities that were probably not compatible with comfortable ignorance about palace operations. She wondered if her honesty about the disciplinary sessions had triggered investigations that would reveal systematic problems throughout the exchange program. The response was almost instantaneous. A dragon materialized in the chamber through what appeared to be quantum translocation, her scaled form carrying technological enhancements that suggested specialized functions. Elena noticed that Coordinator Vex's eyes held the particular focus of someone who processed information at computational speeds. Your Majesty, Coordinator Vex said, her voice carrying harmonics that indicated both respect and immediate readiness for whatever task required priority alpha attention. How may the Intelligence Division serve Imperial requirements? Conduct comprehensive investigation into disciplinary actions taken against human personnel within palace operations, the Emperor commanded. Full security authorization. I want complete documentation of all incidents, personnel involved, authorization procedures, and justification protocols. Coordinator Vex's eyes shifted briefly to Elena, apparently processing visual information about the evidence of recent disciplinary sessions. Investigation parameters suggest systematic analysis rather than isolated incident review. Shall I expand the scope to include all human interactions with dragon nobility? Expand the scope to include all interactions between any palace personnel and human workers, the Emperor replied grimly. I want to understand exactly how the diplomatic exchange program has been functioning at operational levels. Elena realized that her painful experiences were about to become the foundation for a comprehensive investigation that could reshape power relationships throughout the palace. The prospect was simultaneously hopeful and terrifying, since investigations by beings with draconic capabilities probably produced results that were extremely thorough and potentially explosive. Investigation timeline. Coordinator Vex inquired, her technological enhancements already beginning to interface with palace systems in ways that human technology couldn't achieve. Immediate priority, the Emperor said. I want preliminary findings within 4 hours and complete analysis within 12 hours. Utilize all available resources and override any access restrictions that impede information gathering. The speed requirements suggested that draconic intelligence capabilities operated on scales that made human investigation methods look like amateur archaeology. Elena wondered if 12 hours would be sufficient time to document what appeared to be systematic abuse spanning months of operation. Understood, Your Majesty. Investigation parameters include security recording analysis, communication monitoring, personnel interview protocols, and medical documentation review. Shall I coordinate with palace security for evidence preservation? Coordinate with no one until initial findings are available, the Emperor commanded. This investigation operates under Imperial authority only. Anyone who attempts to interfere or obstruct information gathering answers directly to me. Coordinator Vex departed as suddenly as she had arrived, leaving Elena alone with an emperor whose fury had apparently crystallized into something far more dangerous than emotional reaction. She had inadvertently triggered an imperial investigation that would probably examine every aspect of human treatment within the palace. You will remain in my personal custody until this investigation concludes, the emperor informed Elena. Any attempt to harm you or influence your testimony will be considered an act of treason against imperial authority. The protection was reassuring, though Elena wondered if being placed under imperial custody was significantly safer than remaining vulnerable to dragon nobility. Emperor Kairos was clearly furious about the disciplinary sessions, but his response suggested political implications that extended far beyond her personal situation. Your Majesty, Elena said carefully, I don't want my experiences to cause diplomatic problems between the Empire and Earth. The exchange program represents important opportunities for both species. Diplomatic problems, the Emperor repeated, his tone carrying harmonics that suggested bitter amusement. The diplomatic problems began when members of my court decided to torture visiting personnel for entertainment purposes while disguising their actions as educational sessions. Elena realized that the emperor understood the political implications better than she did, and that his fury was directed not at her reporting of the problems but at the existence of the problems themselves. The investigation would probably reveal systematic violations of both imperial law and diplomatic agreements. The exchange program will continue, the emperor said firmly. But it will operate according to principles of mutual respect rather than the organized sadism that certain court members have implemented. Changes are going to be made. The phrase, changes are going to be made, carried implications that made Elena grateful she would not be responsible for explaining the situation to Lord Dracath and Lady Serpentina. Imperial displeasure with noble behavior probably had consequences that extended far beyond additional training sessions. The humans who have endured similar treatment will also be interviewed, the Emperor continued. I want complete documentation of every incident, every fabricated accusation, every unauthorized punishment session. This investigation will be thorough. Elena wondered how many other human workers had been subjected to educational sessions and whether their experiences would reveal patterns of systematic abuse. The investigation might uncover problems that extended throughout the entire palace hierarchy. Intelligence operations at this level typically produce evidence that surprises even experienced investigators, the Emperor observed. I suspect we will discover that the abuse you have experienced represents only the visible portion of much larger problems. The prospect of comprehensive revelation was both hopeful and terrifying. Elena wanted justice for herself and her fellow humans, but she also recognized that exposing systematic abuse could have consequences that affected everyone involved in the exchange program. Justice requires truth, the Emperor said, apparently reading her emotional state through bioelectric field analysis. Uncomfortable truth is still preferable to comfortable deception. The investigation will proceed regardless of political complications. Elena spent the remainder of the day in quarters adjacent to the Emperor's residential section, under protection that was both reassuring and isolating. The chambers were luxurious beyond anything she had experienced, but she remained aware that her situation had moved far beyond routine diplomatic exchange into territory where imperial politics operated according to rules she didn't understand. Preliminary findings are available, Coordinator Vex announced as she materialized in the Emperor's study that evening. Initial analysis confirmed systematic abuse patterns involving multiple noble families and palace security personnel. Emperor Kairos studied the data streams that Coordinator Vex projected into the chamber's holographic display systems. Elena watched evidence of her experiences being analyzed alongside documentation of similar incidents involving other human workers, creating patterns that revealed the scope of the problems. How extensive? The Emperor asked grimly. 38 documented incidents involving 14 different human personnel over the past 6 months, Coordinator Vex reported. Evidence suggests coordinated effort to establish dominance hierarchies through systematic intimidation and punishment protocols. The numbers made Elena realize that her experiences had been part of a much larger campaign of organized cruelty disguised as educational discipline. The investigation had revealed systematic abuse that violated both imperial law and basic principles of civilized behavior. The Imperial Guard Assembly Hall had never been used for criminal proceedings involving noble families, a fact that became apparent when Coordinator Vex spent the early morning hours reconfiguring the chamber's ceremonial layout to accommodate what promised to be the most significant court proceeding in recent Imperial history. 43 separate violations of Imperial dignity statutes, Coordinator Vex reported to Emperor Kairos as they reviewed the complete investigation findings. 16 violations of interspecies diplomatic protocols. 27 counts of unauthorized disciplinary action. And 1 count of conspiracy to conceal criminal activity from Imperial oversight. Elena watched the proceedings from a witness alcove that had been equipped with protection fields strong enough to withstand direct assault by military-grade weapons. The Emperor had explained that testimony in cases involving noble families sometimes triggered emotional responses that compromised witness safety. The evidence documentation is comprehensive, Emperor Kairos said, his voice carrying harmonics that indicated both satisfaction with the investigation's thoroughness and fury at its findings. Security recordings, medical scans, communication intercepts, and testimony from 18 separate human personnel. The main hall filled with dragon nobles who had been summoned under Imperial authority, their expressions ranging from confusion to barely concealed panic as they realized that routine court politics had apparently escalated into serious legal proceedings. Elena recognized several faces from her encounters in the service corridors, though most had never acknowledged her existence. Lord Dracoth entered the hall with Lady Serpentina, both maintaining the dignified bearing that dragon nobility used to demonstrate superiority over uncomfortable circumstances. Elena noticed that their confident postures seemed somewhat forced, suggesting awareness that their situation had moved beyond political maneuvering into territory where Imperial authority operated according to inflexible principles. This assembly will address systematic violations of Imperial law and diplomatic protocol, Emperor Kairos announced, his voice enhanced by harmonic amplifiers that ensured every word carried the full weight of Imperial authority. Evidence has been gathered regarding unauthorized disciplinary actions taken against visiting personnel from Earth. The reaction among the assembled nobles was immediate and dramatic. Expressions shifted from confusion to alarm as they realized that their treatment of human workers had attracted Imperial attention. Elena suspected that most had assumed their actions were too insignificant to warrant notice from the highest levels of authority. Lord Dracoth, the Emperor commanded, approached the judgment platform. Lord Dracoth moved through the hall with the measured dignity of someone who understood that his future depended entirely on the next few minutes. Elena watched him position himself before the Emperor, maintaining aristocratic bearing despite circumstances that had moved far beyond routine political considerations. You have been identified as the primary coordinator of systematic abuse directed against human diplomatic personnel, Emperor Kairos stated. Security recordings document your direct participation in fabricating accusations and authorizing torture sessions disguised as educational discipline. The accusations were delivered with clinical precision, accompanied by holographic evidence that left no room for denial or misinterpretation. Elena watched Lord Dracoth's confident facade crumble as irrefutable documentation of his actions was displayed for the entire assembly. Your Majesty, Lord Dracoth said, apparently attempting to salvage his position through careful political maneuvering, the disciplinary measures were implemented to maintain proper hierarchical relationships and ensure respect for draconic authority among visiting species. Torture, the Emperor corrected coldly, implemented for personal entertainment while violating both Imperial law and diplomatic agreements. Your authorization exceeded legal boundaries and demonstrated contempt for the principles upon which this empire was founded. Elena realized that the Emperor was not merely addressing criminal behavior but challenging fundamental assumptions about power relationships within the Imperial hierarchy. The proceedings were establishing precedents that would affect how dragons interacted with other species throughout the Empire. Lady Serpentina, the Emperor commanded, join Lord Dracoth on the judgment platform. Lady Serpentina's approach lacked the confident bearing she had displayed during Elena's disciplinary sessions. The dragon noblewoman clearly understood that her situation had moved beyond the comfortable exercise of authority over powerless humans into territory where her own power was subject to higher principles. Evidence documents your direct participation in organizing abuse sessions and encouraging other nobles to participate in systematic intimidation of human personnel, the emperor stated. Your actions violated both criminal statutes and diplomatic protocols. The holographic evidence was overwhelming. Security recordings showed Lady Serpentina coordinating with other nobles to fabricate accusations against human workers, personally supervising torture sessions, and actively recruiting other court members to participate in what she had described as educational entertainment. 38 separate incidents, Coordinator Vex announced, her technological enhancements interfacing with the hall's display systems to present comprehensive documentation. Involving multiple human victims and coordinated by a network of noble families operating under Lord Drakatha's administrative authority. Elena watched as additional nobles were summoned to the judgment platform, each facing evidence of their participation in systematic abuse that had operated with the efficiency of organized criminal enterprise. The scope of the conspiracy was far larger than she had realized during her own experiences. Captain Thorne and the palace guard personnel who participated in unauthorized disciplinary sessions, the Emperor commanded, report to the judgment platform. The military personnel approached with the rigid precision of soldiers who understood that their careers and possibly their freedom depended on the Emperor's judgment. Elena recognized Captain Thorne from her disciplinary sessions, though his current demeanor suggested significantly less confidence than he had displayed while operating torture equipment. Military personnel who participate in criminal activity bring dishonor to the Imperial Guard and violate fundamental principles of lawful authority, Emperor Cairo stated. Your oath of service includes protection of all beings under Imperial jurisdiction, not participation in their systematic abuse. The Emperor's attention returned to the assembled nobles, his massive form radiating authority that made the hall's crystalline architecture resonate with harmonic frequencies that approached the threshold of pain. Elena had never experienced imperial fury at this scale and discovered that it was a force of nature that transcended individual emotion. These proceedings will establish new precedents for interspecies relations within the Empire, the Emperor announced. The systematic abuse documented by this investigation represents not merely criminal behavior but fundamental violation of the principles upon which imperial authority is based. Elena realized that her painful experiences had triggered a comprehensive reformation of imperial policies regarding interaction with other species. The investigation had revealed problems that extended far beyond individual criminal acts into systematic cultural patterns that require correction. Sentences will reflect both the criminal nature of these actions and their impact on imperial integrity, the Emperor continued. Lord Drakath, you are stripped of all noble privileges and sentenced to imprisonment for a term of 20 standard years. Your properties are confiscated and designated for reparations to the victims of your criminal enterprise. The sentence was delivered with clinical precision, but Elena could hear harmonic undertones that indicated barely controlled fury. Lord Drakatha's confident aristocratic bearing finally collapsed completely as he realized that his assumption of immunity from consequences had been catastrophically incorrect. Lady Serpentina, you are similarly stripped of noble status and sentenced to 15 standard years imprisonment. Your active participation in organizing systematic abuse demonstrates contempt for both law and basic principles of civilized behavior. Elena watched the systematic dismantling of the power structure that had made her suffering possible, feeling a complex mixture of satisfaction and amazement that justice was being administered with such comprehensive thoroughness. The remaining conspirators will receive sentences proportional to their level of participation, the Emperor announced. Palace Guard personnel who violated their oaths will be dishonorably discharged and sentenced to appropriate imprisonment terms. The proceedings continued with methodical precision as the Emperor addressed each case individually, ensuring that justice was both comprehensive and carefully calibrated to the specific crimes involved. Elena realized that imperial authority, when properly applied, was a force that could reshape entire institutional structures. The transformation of Elena's circumstances from abused servant to imperial advisor occurred with the same systematic precision that had characterized the criminal proceedings, though the speed of change left her feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the scale of reorganization taking place throughout the palace. Your new quarters are located in the administrative wing, Coordinator Vex explained as they moved through corridors that Elena had never been permitted to access during her service duties. Security protocols include personal protection fields and direct communication access to Imperial authority. Elena examined her new living space with amazement that bordered on disbelief. The chambers were larger than most Earth apartments, equipped with technology that responded to her presence with intuitive efficiency. The contrast with her previous cramped service quarters was so dramatic that she wondered if she was experiencing some kind of elaborate dream sequence. The Emperor has designated you as Human Affairs Coordinator, Coordinator Vex continued, consulting data streams that appeared in holographic displays throughout the chamber. Your authority includes oversight of all human personnel within palace operations and direct input into policies affecting interspecies relations. The title came with responsibilities that felt simultaneously exciting and terrifying. Elena had gone from cleaning floors to helping establish policies that would affect thousands of people across multiple worlds, a transition that required mental adjustments she wasn't sure she was prepared to make. What exactly does Human Affairs Coordinator do? Elena asked, studying the technological interfaces that had automatically configured themselves to accommodate human physiology and cognitive patterns. You ensure that the systematic abuse documented by our investigation never occurs again, Coordinator Vex replied matter-of-factly. Your experience with both human vulnerabilities and dragon power structures makes you uniquely qualified to identify potential problems before they escalate into criminal behavior. Emperor Kairos materialized in the chamber through quantum translocation that was becoming familiar, though Elena still found the casual violation of physical laws somewhat disorienting. His presence immediately shifted the energy patterns throughout the space, causing decorative crystals to resonate with harmonic frequencies that indicated Imperial attention. I trust your new accommodations are adequate, the Emperor said, though his tone suggested that adequacy was the minimum acceptable standard rather than the goal. The transition from service duties to administrative responsibilities requires significant adjustment. Everything is magnificent, Your Majesty, Elena replied honestly. Though I'm still processing the scope of changes that have occurred over the past few days. Change is necessary when existing systems fail to protect those they are supposed to serve, the Emperor observed. The investigation revealed institutional problems that required comprehensive correction rather than superficial modifications. Elena had been studying reports about the broader implications of the criminal proceedings, learning that the scandal had triggered reforms throughout the Imperial administration. The systematic abuse of human personnel had apparently been symptomatic of larger problems in how the Empire managed relationships with less powerful species. The Galactic Diplomatic Council has expressed concern about the incidents, the Emperor continued. Though they seem more worried about potential disruption to existing power structures than about the welfare of abuse victims. The political ramifications were complex enough to make Elena grateful that her new responsibilities focused on practical administration rather than high-level diplomacy. The revelation that dragon nobles had been systematically torturing visiting personnel had apparently shocked civilizations that had assumed the Draconic Empire operated according to civilized principles. Your recommendations for restructuring human personnel policies will be implemented immediately, the Emperor said. The goal is creating systems that prevent abuse while enabling meaningful cultural exchange. Elena had spent considerable time developing policy proposals that addressed the structural problems revealed by the investigation. The recommendations focused on establishing clear authority boundaries, implementing independent oversight mechanisms, and ensuring that disciplinary procedures operated according to legal standards rather than noble preferences. The other human workers have been relocated to improved quarters and given compensation for their treatment, Coordinator Vex reported. Several have requested reassignment to different positions within the palace administration. Elena was particularly interested in hearing that Marcus Webb had been promoted to Human Resources Liaison, a position that would allow him to use his survival skills for protecting other workers rather than simply enduring abuse. The systematic elevation of human personnel from service roles to administrative positions represented a fundamental shift in Imperial power structures. The reformed exchange program will expand to include educational opportunities and technological training, the Emperor announced. Humans will participate in dragon civilization as partners rather than servants. The prospect of genuine partnership between species was exciting enough to make Elena feel optimistic about the future despite her recent traumatic experiences. The systematic abuse had been horrific, but the Imperial response suggested that meaningful change was possible when authority was exercised according to principles of justice rather than convenience. Your personal guard detail has been assigned, Coordinator Vex noted, apparently addressing practical security considerations. Captain Zara and her unit specialize in protection services for high-value administrative personnel. Elena wondered if personal protection was necessary, though she supposed that implementing comprehensive reforms probably created enemies among those who had benefited from the previous system. The criminal proceedings had stripped several noble families of their power and property, creating political tensions that might require ongoing security considerations. The transformation of palace culture will require time and careful management, the Emperor observed. Institutional change is never simple, particularly when it challenges established hierarchies. Elena had noticed that her elevation to administrative authority had created interesting social dynamics among dragon personnel who had previously ignored her existence. Some showed genuine respect for her new position, while others displayed the careful courtesy that powerful beings used when they were required to interact with people they still considered inferior. The interspecies relations department has been expanded to. The transformation of Elena's circumstances from abused servant to imperial advisor occurred with the same systematic precision that had characterized the criminal proceedings, though the speed of change left her feeling somewhat overwhelmed by the scale of reorganization taking place throughout the palace. Your new quarters are located in the administrative wing, Coordinator Vex explained as they moved through corridors that Elena had never been permitted to access during her service duties. Security protocols include personal protection fields and direct communication access to Imperial authority. Elena examined her new living space with amazement that bordered on disbelief. The chambers were larger than most Earth apartments, equipped with technology that responded to her presence with intuitive efficiency. The contrast with her previous cramped service quarters was so dramatic that she wondered if she was experiencing some kind of elaborate dream sequence. The Emperor has designated you as Human Affairs Coordinator, Coordinator Vex continued, consulting data streams that appeared in holographic displays throughout the chamber. Your authority includes oversight of all human personnel within palace operations and direct input into policies affecting interspecies relations. The title came with responsibilities that felt simultaneously exciting and terrifying. Elena had gone from cleaning floors to helping establish policies that would affect thousands of people across multiple worlds, a transition that required mental adjustment she wasn't sure she was prepared to make. What exactly does Human Affairs Coordinator do? Elena asked, studying the technological interfaces that had automatically configured themselves to accommodate human physiology and cognitive patterns. You ensure that the systematic abuse documented by our investigation never occurs again, Coordinator Vex replied matter-of-factly. Your experience with both human vulnerabilities and dragon power structures makes you uniquely qualified to identify potential problems before they escalate into criminal behavior. Emperor Kairos materialized in the chamber through quantum translocation that was becoming familiar, though Elena still found the casual violation of physical laws somewhat disorienting. 6 months after addressing the Galactic Diplomatic Council, Elena stood in her office overlooking the palace's reformed Cultural Exchange Center, watching human and dragon students collaborate on quantum engineering projects that would have been impossible before the systematic changes implemented following the abuse investigation. The integration success metrics exceed all projections, reported Dr. Sarah Chen, Elena's deputy coordinator who had arrived as part of the expanded exchange program. Academic cooperation between species has created breakthrough developments in 12 different research fields. Elena smiled as she watched a young dragon carefully explaining multidimensional mathematics to a group of human graduate students, the patient teaching style a dramatic contrast to the authoritarian dominance that had previously characterized interspecies interactions within the palace. The cultural transformation has been remarkable, Elena agreed, reviewing reports that documented the comprehensive changes implemented throughout the Imperial administration. Though I sometimes wonder if we would have achieved these results through gradual reform rather than the crisis that forced immediate action. Emperor Kairos materialized in the office with the quantum translocation that had become routine, though Elena still felt a moment of adjustment whenever Imperial authority appeared without warning. Their relationship had evolved into something approaching friendship, though the power differential remained significant enough to require careful navigation. The crisis was necessary, the Emperor said, settling into a chair designed to accommodate his massive draconic form. Gradual reform would have faced resistance from entrenched interests that preferred the existing power structures. Sometimes justice requires dramatic intervention rather than patient negotiation. Elena had come to understand that the Emperor's response to her situation had been motivated by principles that extended far beyond her individual circumstances. The systematic abuse had violated fundamental values that formed the foundation of imperial authority, requiring comprehensive correction to maintain the legitimacy of dragon leadership. The Andorian delegation has requested implementation of similar protection protocols, Elena reported, consulting her daily briefing materials. Apparently our reforms have inspired other civilizations to examine their own treatment of minority species. The ripple effects of the palace reforms had spread throughout galactic civilization, creating pressure for systematic changes in how powerful species interacted with their less technologically advanced neighbors. Elena's traumatic experiences had inadvertently become a catalyst for comprehensive interspecies rights reform. Your address to the Diplomatic Council has been studied by political theorists throughout the galaxy, the Emperor observed with obvious satisfaction. The principle that leadership requires protection of the vulnerable regardless of species has been adopted as a fundamental standard for civilized governance. Elena remembered the nervousness she had felt while addressing the most powerful beings in known space, explaining how systematic abuse had been disguised as educational discipline and outlining the reforms necessary to prevent similar problems. The presentation had apparently been more persuasive than she had realized. Marcus sends his regards from the Arcturus Cultural Center, Elena said, reading messages from other humans who had been promoted to administrative positions throughout the Empire. He says that establishing human dignity protocols there required significantly less drama than our experience here. The transformation of human personnel from servants to administrators had been implemented systematically across all Imperial facilities, creating opportunities for genuine cultural exchange that had never existed under the previous hierarchical arrangements. Elena took considerable satisfaction in knowing that other humans would never experience the systematic abuse that had characterized her early months at the palace. The noble families who participated in the abuse conspiracy have completed their rehabilitation programs, Coordinator Vex reported, materializing through quantum translocation with data streams that detailed the ongoing consequences of the criminal proceedings. Most have expressed genuine understanding of the principles they violated. Elena had been surprised to learn that Dragon Justice emphasized rehabilitation rather than purely punitive responses to criminal behavior. Lord Dracath and Lady Serpentina had spent their imprisonment period studying interspecies ethics and cultural sensitivity, emerging with apparently genuine appreciation for the harm their actions had caused. Some transformations require external pressure rather than internal motivation, the Emperor observed. Though the sincerity of their reformation will be tested through their future behavior rather than their current statements. The systematic changes had created new power structures throughout the palace, with authority distributed according to competence and ethical principles rather than species membership or inherited status. Elena's position as Human Affairs Coordinator had become a model for similar roles representing other minority species within the Imperial administration. The Quantum Consciousness Research Program has produced breakthrough insights, Dr. Chen reported enthusiastically. Collaboration between human creativity and dragon analytical capabilities has revealed new approaches to multidimensional problem-solving. Elena was particularly proud of the research programs that had emerged from genuine partnership between species rather than the exploitative relationships that had previously characterized interspecies interaction. The combination of human innovation with dragon technological capabilities had created developments that neither species could have achieved independently. Your family on Earth has been invited to visit the palace, the Emperor announced, apparently enjoying Elena's surprise at this information. The diplomatic exchange program now includes family visitation rights for all participants. The prospect of showing her parents the palace that had been both her prison and her salvation created complex emotions that Elena was still processing. They would probably have difficulty believing that their daughter had gone from cleaning floors to helping establish galactic policy standards for interspecies relations. The invitation extends to permanent relocation if desired, the Emperor continued. The Empire can always benefit from additional human perspectives on administrative challenges. Elena had been considering the possibility of bringing her family to Celestine, though the decision required careful thought about the implications of permanent separation from Earth. The palace had become her home in ways she had never expected, but family connections remained important despite the extraordinary opportunities her position provided. The memorial garden for abuse victims will be dedicated next week, Coordinator Vex announced, displaying holographic plans for a crystalline structure that would serve as both remembrance and education about the importance of protecting vulnerable individuals within power structures. Elena had insisted that the memorial include recognition of all beings who had suffered systematic abuse throughout Imperial history, not just the humans affected by the recent conspiracy. The structure would serve as a permanent reminder that authority carried responsibilities as well as privileges. Your autobiography has been approved for publication, the Emperor said with obvious amusement. Though the diplomatic editors have suggested modifications to certain passages that describe imperial administration in unflattering terms. Elena laughed, remembering the diplomatic negotiations required to balance honesty about her experiences with respect for imperial dignity. The book would probably become required reading for anyone involved in interspecies relations, though she wondered if readers would find the transformation from victim to administrator as surreal as she still sometimes felt. The most important achievement, Elena said, looking out at the Cultural Exchange Center where dozens of species work together on projects that benefited everyone involved, is that future participants in exchange programs will experience partnership rather than exploitation. Emperor Kairos nodded agreement, his massive form radiating satisfaction with the comprehensive changes that had transformed palace culture. True leadership protects those who cannot protect themselves, he said, echoing the principles that had motivated his response to Elena's situation. The systematic abuse you endured violated that fundamental responsibility. Elena reflected on the extraordinary journey that had brought her from Earth to her current position as one of the most influential humans in galactic politics. The systematic abuse had been horrible, but the Imperial response had demonstrated that justice was possible when authority was exercised according to principles rather than convenience. The next challenge, she said, studying reports about ongoing reforms throughout the Empire, will be ensuring that these changes become permanent rather than temporary responses to crisis. Permanent change requires institutional structures that make abuse impossible rather than merely illegal, the Emperor agreed. Your recommendations for systematic oversight and protection protocols will be implemented throughout Imperial space. As Elena prepared for another day of work that would affect the lives of millions of beings across hundreds of worlds, she marveled at the transformation that had begun with her decision to report systematic abuse despite the personal risks involved. Sometimes speaking truth to power could change the universe, though the process was rarely comfortable for anyone involved. The crystalline palace around her hummed with the energy of genuine cooperation between species, a harmony that had replaced the previous discord of exploitation and domination. Elena had learned that true strength came not from the ability to inflict suffering but from the wisdom to use power for protection rather than oppression.